There are many wonderful and different plants in the rainforest, hundreds and hundreds of species that you don't see anyplace else on Earth. We need to save these plants, and we need to save the environment in which they grow. Today, when we're doing our art lessons, you'll be painting some epiphytes, or air plants, that grow up in the branches and in the canopy of the rainforest. Specifically, we'll be painting tillandsias, bromeliads, and orchids. Perhaps by drawing and painting these plants, you will remember that we all need to make a big effort to save the rainforests. The plants on this particular log are called epiphytes, and that means that they draw their food and minerals and all the things that they need to grow from the air. They don't have roots. They don't grow down into the ground and take their food from whatever is in the ground, the soil in the ground. And they're very interesting plants that grow in the rainforest. They grow on trees and bark, branches and vines. Today we're going to be painting a picture of some tillandsias, which are a type of epiphyte. I'd like to show you some student examples of epiphytes. Several students have treated these plants in different ways. Notice how bright and colorful this particular picture is. This treatment is a little bit more delicate, but just absolutely beautiful. Very nicely done, a little more watercolory. And this set of epiphytes is very bold in design and bold in color. So what I'm trying to point out here is that your picture will not look exactly like mine, and yours won't look like anybody else's. It will be your own picture and have its own charm and interest. We're going to do these today in watercolor, to which white has been added, making the watercolor opaque. And I think you'll agree that all of those were beautiful examples. We have one more, and each one was different. So now I'm going to show you our materials for this lesson. And our materials are going to be a piece of paper, white construction paper or white watercolor paper if you can get it. We're going to use our basic watercolor box. We're going to be using some water, but not very much, and a brush with bristles in it like this that we're going to mop off. And I have some white tempera right there that will add to the watercolor. So let's begin. You might need a pencil, or you might want to use a crayon. You might very well have some of these plants called tillandsias or epiphytes in your house. They might be in a nursery, a plant nursery, or it might be in your school someplace. Someone might bring one to school so that you could actually look at the plant while you paint and draw it. That would be the best thing that you could do. Otherwise, notice that I've just made a thin stem, and I've indicated the flower is going to be sort of thin and spiky. And the leaves of the tillandsia are not broad. They're skinny, thin, and they're very much structured, of course, so that they can take their nourishment from the air. As you draw this, you want to sort of curl around. Some of these go behind, some of these come in front of, and they're long and skinny. Be very bold in your drawing and be very free as you draw that part of your epiphyte. Now, another epiphyte that is also a tillandsia has part of its flower looking like this. Now notice that I have some lines in the background. That's not going to bother me. When I paint, I can paint over them. And some of them have very long, and some of them have very short curlicue type leaves, which take the moisture in. And we're going to put another little epiphyte coming out here another tillandsia, and some more indications of leaves down here. Now notice that I've left it sort of sketchy. That's because we're going to paint it, and as we paint it, we're going to be putting in more details. So I'm going to switch now from drawing. It's a rough sketch, but it's plenty for us to begin with. We're going to use our paints and the tempera paint. Just a tiny bit of water. I'm going to mop off the brush. I have a paper towel handy just in case I need to use it. I'm going to dip right in the white tempera and then directly into the watercolor. I can even add just a touch of orange to that. And watch how I use my brush to come out from the center so I get that strokey, sort of thin feeling. And if it doesn't move, there I've got a little bit deeper color. That's okay. You don't want it to be all one color. You want to get variety. Let's do all the very light flowers first. More white gives you more of a light pink, like that. And orange plus red gives you a very beautiful sort of coral color. You can come in with just plain red if you wish. But make sure that you get a lot of variety in your strokes. Now, I'm sorry, in your color. And then I'm going to do one down here as well. That was very, very fast. I'm going to wash my brush out. And there are some little tiny blossoms at the end of these, and they're purple. I'm going to take a little white, a little blue, a little purple. I could even add some red to that purple if I wanted to. And I'm going to make tiny, tiny, tiny tips of purple on top of these flowers. Okay? And we're just adding a little here and a little there, a little here and a little there. So that looks pretty much like that particular flower. Now, as far as the leaves go, again, we want to make them look interesting, so I'm going to add green to yellow so we get some variety. And look at the type of stroke I'm using. It's sort of a curlicue, very free from the wrist type of stroke. If I want to get some dark ones in there, I can put some dark. And sometimes I'm actually ignoring part of my drawing and just putting as many in as I feel look attractive. Part of them are yellow-green, part of them are blue-green. And we're going to use that for the stem too. The stem's probably more yellow-green. Using the point of my brush, the edge of my brush, a little more yellow there as it comes up to the flower. And down here as well. And that pretty much does it as far as how we basically go on with this picture, because wherever you have the leaves, they're going to curl out and over each other. In nature, nothing looks so perfect as though they were all on one plane or one type of area. They curl and they go over each other and in front of and in back of. I'm going to wash my brush out, and I'm going to mop it off, take a little bit of white, a lot of yellow this time, a lot of yellow, a little bit of green, and I'm going to begin. Ooh, look, isn't that rich? Beautiful color. A lot of yellow, some green. And it's streaky also. That's probably because I have that white in there. It helps it to streak. If I go over it, see, that's fine. And as these petals, which really look like leaves, unfold and come up to the top, they have a little bit of red on the tips that give them a very beautiful color. Some of these plants have more red than others, and some are just on the tips, but you want to use sort of a strong red out of your box. Now, that was easy. Let's try the rest of the leaves down here. Again, you're going to use the tip of your brush, two greens, a yellow green And you can use sort of a bluish green to get the feeling of this. If you add some white, look what happens. You tone it down a little bit, and sometimes you may want to do that to get a variety. White makes it more gray, doesn't it? And these are coming over in front of each other. And you twist your wrist, twist and curl to get the feeling of these plants. You know, at one time, before people began using the correct names like epiphytes and tillandsias, people sometimes call them spider plants because the actual twist and turn and overlapping makes them look sort of like spiders to some people. Now to get the bark color, I'm going to use some orange and some brown and a little yellow, orange, brown, and yellow, basically. But when I look at that, I say, oh, that's much too light. It makes a good contrast, but we need a little blue in there too. That's better to make it really look like bark. So with my orange, yellow, and brown, I'm going to go behind the tillandsia leaves, and I'm going to put in that bark log. Remember, epiphytes don't grow in the ground. They grow generally on the bark and on the trunks of trees. A little brown, blue in there to make it shading. Don't use your black, just use blue. And that will give you some darker, well, that's a little too dark. How am I going to fix it? I just went back and used some more orange and yellow and brown to lighten it up a little bit. And I'm just going to go like this, and what you'll be doing is filling in the log. So go ahead and paint your epiphylium, your epiphytes. You have quite a few here. And then paint the log that's behind them. The log might take a little time because you'll want to turn your brush on its edge. And by the way, nobody minds having a little bit of this, well, let's see, paper showing. You know, in watercolors especially, to get sparkle in their pictures, sometimes people use paper, let the paper show. Logs, again, are not all one color. They have a variety of colors in them, and so yours won't be all the same all the way through either. Okay, just finish this up. Now again, I drew this with a permanent black felt pen so that you could see it. What you'll want to do after this dries tomorrow, probably, depending on how yours looks, is to come back with your crayon and go over those lines that you've wiped out. Some people don't like to do that, and that's perfectly fine. If you don't want to outline it, you don't have to. But the outlining does make everything show up very nicely. And that's pretty much finished. I'm going to go back and show you again a couple of student examples. This is mine. I'm going to hold it up for you. And that looks pretty much finished. But I'll show you the student examples also again so that you can see how it looks when it's finished. There's one. And here's one that's entirely different. This has a very strong, stylized feeling to it. It shows a lot of the log, but that's great. Here's another one, very nicely done. All of these are great, and they're all different, just like yours will be different. Now this is a very light type of style, and here's a rather thick type of style. Aren't those wonderful? Have fun doing your epiphytes from the rainforest. These plants are bromeliads that live in the rainforest. Sometimes they get to be as much as 2 feet in diameter. The cup that's formed in the center of these leaves holds quite a bit of water. The centers of the bromeliads often are the home of many tiny rainforest creatures, like frogs and salamanders and insects. There's a whole little world existing in the center of many bromeliads. This is another bromeliad. This has sort of a silvery, grayish, greenish leaf that turn over and bend over toward you, with a beautiful pinkish flower that has a tiny bit of orange in it and a little bit of mauve or purple as well. Isn't that gorgeous? Very pretty flower. Now we're going to do a bromeliad plant, and in order to do the bromeliad we need some paints, and here we are with our watercolor box again, with our white tempera, piece of paper towel, a bristle brush, and some water. And you notice that I keep wiping my brush off because I use very little water in these pictures. Before we begin with the bromeliads, let me show you the pictures that students have done from bromeliads. Here's one that's just beautiful. Notice how you get the feeling of this leaf coming toward you, and how you get the feeling of pebbly bark that it's in, and the nice spiky feeling of the flower. Now again, they've done black in the background. It's not always necessary to do that. It merely makes your picture look more dramatic. Here's another student picture. This is a lot lighter, airier in feeling. Pink is lighter. You see a variety of shade there, light and shade. Very beautiful picture done by, a student who was 8 or 9 years old. And here's another very bright one. Notice the change in color. The underside of the leaf and the upper side. Very, very good looking picture that another child has done. And here we have one again that is entirely different, very dramatic looking with the large leaves. So let's begin to draw our bromeliad. The bromeliad flower actually has a rather thin stem coming up through the center of the plant, and then it branches out something like this. And the first thing you know, it starts to get these very spiky points. So we're going to draw layers of spiky points. Each layer is going to get longer and taller and bigger. And they seem to be coming behind each other like this. We're going to have a very dramatic looking flower on this bromeliad. Now bromeliads grow throughout the rainforest. This one may have come from Brazil, or may have come from Costa Rica, or somewhere deeper in South America. However, bromeliads have been for years very favorite houseplants of a lot of people because they don't demand a lot of care. Now we want to get some of these leaves looking as though they're coming toward us, so we're going to draw like this in a curve and then sort of drop down. And when we come up here, we're going to come back like that, and the underside of the leaf is going to be drawn up to the curve like that. Now this looks like it's under, then it turns and curves and comes sort of toward us. Some of these are going toward us and some are going away, but they all have a tendency to crisscross over each other. You can come right up to the margin if you wish. It makes it look very dramatic. This one is coming from behind, and if we want to show the underside of the leaf as well, we can just curve it like that and show the underside. All of them come up from the center and move out from the center, and some turn, some come up like this and turn and curve under and come back behind another leaf, and that makes it look very interesting also. We might have another one down here, might have some ones that are just beginning to come up out of the soil. And let's put a little bit of, well, sort of mulch or soil there, barky soil, because these grow very much like the epiphyliums with a lot of sustenance from the air, a lot of nutrients that they take out of the air as well as out of this sort of barky type of soil. Now I'm going to bring over our paints. Again, you want to start painting with the lightest part, and many epiphyliums have a bright pink flower. Well, how do you get pink when pink isn't in your box? You merely go into the white and then into the red and swish it around. And you want your brush to be streaky. Notice that the brush has pink in it and red streaks too. So I'm going to do the edge of the brush, and since the flower grows up, my streaks are going up and they're coming out like this. Now as I press, I may be getting some deeper red strokes, and if I've lost my drawing, don't worry about that. Again, when this is dry, we can come back and find it again. I'm deliberately putting some deeper red in there, even a tiny bit, just a hint of orange. It's funny how many pink things have just a hint of orange in them, sort of coral, and I'm coming out like this in spikes using the edge of my brush, not the flat part. The flat part is, we're going to save. This is the edge or the tip of the brush. Now, there you've got a very bright, spiky, dramatic pink flower. You want to get a little shading in there. Go back and try to get more red. And that gives you a little sparkle, a little color, while retaining the pink flavor. Isn't that pretty? Sure was fun to do. I'm going to wash my brush out now, but after I wash it out, I'm going to dry it on the paper towel like this and go to the white, using the white as water, and to the yellow, and then to the green, lots of yellow. And we're going to do the stem of the bromeliad, bringing it up to the base of the flower like this. It's okay that some of that pink got in there, and using quite a bit of bright yellow. Now, let's talk about the leaf itself. On this particular bromeliad, we're going to have to put in quite a bit of white with our yellows and blues and greens. I'm going to yellow, blue, green after I've loaded my brush with white. And I'm going to do the top this time. I want to show you how you get the top and the underside lighter and yet streaky. Now, notice this time I'm using the broad part of my brush. The other part of my brush, the edge is used for the edges of this, and then I'm wiping my brush back and forth, getting some streaky white in there, getting that silvery feeling with the streaks of white. Now the underside is going to be darker, and that means we're going to use more blue and more green and less yellow. Okay, so notice right away with the deeper blue and green and very little white, very little yellow, you get the underside of the leaf. And this will look quite dramatic when the picture is done. It'll give you a feeling of coming forward here and going back in that direction. Well, while we've got the blue and green in here, we might as well do too much water, so that's okay, I can fix it. Just going back and getting more paint in and doing the underside of that leaf, and the top part's going to be lighter, more white in it perhaps. Oh, very nice, yes. And that gives us a feeling of shading and of top and bottom. Okay, let's use a broad flat part of our brush, sticking with yellow, green, and blue, and white. And let's do this leaf right here. That's going up in this direction. It's going to look quite dark toward the flower part here. Okay. It gets lighter as it goes back. And as it curves underneath, it's going to look quite a bit darker with the addition of blue and green. And that's the underside. Isn't that easy? People often wonder, well, how do you make it look like it's coming towards you, or how do you make it look like it's going away. Well, you can control it with light and shade. And there we have it for that one. Notice that I'm letting some of these white streaks show, and that's because some of these leaves were sort of a dusty, silvery looking green. Sticking it in white first. And every time I come next to another one, I have to show some darker shading, otherwise they'll all blend in together, and you don't want that to happen. And over here it's going to be lighter. Back of your brush, front of your brush. Big, flat strokes. And I'm not going back over it 100 times. You know, that part right there has streaks in it. Many times people say, oh, streaks, and they don't even know that they're saying it to themselves. They say, oh, I've got some streaks. I better go back and paint over those streaks. Leave the streaks alone. They should look like that. They look great. All right, over here it's going to be darker. Blue. I even went to the purple that time, didn't I? Aha! And a little bit silvery. I don't want to lose my yellow entirely. If I do, the leaves won't hold together. They'll look like they're two different plants. All right, moving right along, flat of your brush. Now, by using tempera with your watercolors, it's a lot easier than having about 6 dishes of tempera out. True, your watercolor box may never be the same, but once you get onto this technique, you may never want to go back to another technique, because this is so pretty and so nice. Up there, I think there's a leaf in back there. Leaf underneath here. Light and shade. Light and shade, it's everything in your picture. It's the difference between making a good picture and making sort of a mediocre one. Ah, look at that. Okay, and we're going to come out there. That curve would continue there. One more leaf. We're just about done. Now, I'm working very fast. I would urge you to stand up while you're doing this one, especially because it's so big and bold. And I would also urge you to paint in these big, bold strokes. Use the back and front of your brush. Maybe that needs a little bit of lightening there. A little bit of white. A bit of softening. And since I lost my edge, look, I'm going to go back in with blue and green and find my edge again. How's that? Now, the only thing that we have left here to do, unless again you want to do a black background on yours, and you don't absolutely have to. The way this is looking right now, I'm not entirely sure that I want to put a black background in this. But when we go to the brown, I'm going to use, oddly enough, brown and black this time, and blue and purple, to get this dark. Ooh, that's too dark. Okay, I'm not going to wipe it out, but I'm going to go back to orange and brown and mix some of it in, and we're going to get a very beautiful shade, some blue too, of dirt down here that looks rich and barky. By barky, I mean lots of bark in it, lots of loose, sort of almost charcoaly type soil. And some highlights by using orange and brown. Some highlights in there for contrast. And a little blue for shading. And your picture is essentially finished. Now it's up to you, as you look at this, it's up to you to say, well, do I want to keep it like this, or do I want to put a black background in, as some of the kids did? I think I'll leave this like this. I'll show you a student painting, and you can make your own decision about, do you want the black background or do you want the white? I can't decide. They both look good. They're both different. Now, tomorrow or the next day, when this is finished and dry, perfectly dry, I'm going to take a chance on this one, but when it's perfectly dry, take your black crayon and again, bring back your lines. Some people like to do this, some people don't. You have a little trouble where it's wet probably. And by bringing back your lines, you can decide, do I need a background or do I like it just as it is? It's standing by itself, its own merits. This is where you have to use a little bit of your own decision making. You can come back in here and notice the negative space patterns that are happening here, and look what's happening too when I'm getting into the wet. That's a little tricky, isn't it? I definitely would use black crayon if I were you people. Okay, and that's almost finished, except where do we lose a line or two? Now, since this is so painterly up here and so pretty, you don't want to go crazy getting your, getting your spikes back in. Just suggest them occasionally. See, just a little bit goes a long way. You don't have to draw every single one back in. Just a little spikiness to indicate that these are very sharp, and suggestion is sometimes better than overdoing it. You don't want to kill it. It looks very nice like that. Okay, maybe a little one here, there. You have to step away from your picture. And you have your bromeliad all finished as a big, bold, brilliant picture. Orchids are also in the epiphyte family. They hang on branches and vines in the rainforest. Orchids come in many different colors and sizes, some quite small and some large and dramatic. Like most rainforest flowers, orchids provide a bright flash of color in an otherwise dark world. I'd like to show you before we begin some student work of orchids and show you how a finished picture looks. In this particular picture, I like the fact that this person added some orange to the pink and some white so that it doesn't look quite like it just came out of the bottle. They've done quite a bit of mixing. In this particular picture, this person went to the other end of the color spectrum and did some cool colors like greens and blues. Here we have, again, some shading that's showing, some darker colors and some lighter colors, and we want to get some of that streaking in there. And so all of these pictures that students have done are different, and that's good. We want them all to be different, and we want them all to be an expression of your own personality. Well, having said that, let's look at the materials that we're going to use. We're going to be using, again, watercolors in a box. We're going to use a bristle brush. We're going to use white tempera paint in a cup, and we're going to use some water as well. So, having said that, we're going to begin. And I have a light drawing here, but I'm going to use a dark felt pen so that you can see what's going on. In this particular picture, we're going to start with the center of the orchid. And some people are sort of afraid of drawing orchids because there is a part that seems to come straight at you, and that's this part right here. And people say, well, gee, how do you draw that part that comes straight at you? Well, you draw this part first, and notice the frilly part around the center of the orchid, and then you draw the bell-shaped part just right up here. And somehow when you get finished, it does look like this flower is coming at you, and many orchids give you that feeling. Now, most orchid petals, not all, but most orchid petals are rather frilly or curved. Some are a little bit more straight than others. And after we finish painting this, we'll probably put some leaves in too, not necessarily leaves of orchids, but leaves of that might be found in the rainforest. And we'll put those in for contrast. Now, I'm going to use very little water, just a tiny bit of water, a lot of white, and I'm going to mix first in with the yellow and with the orange, and we're going to do the center of the flower. And again, you don't want to use just one color out of your brush. Look how I'm shading with white, yellow, and orange. And that gives you a much more interesting center than if you had just used one color right out of the box. And talking about mixing again, this time to get a very rich sort of purple, I'm going to use red plus purple, which gives us a rather magenta shade. Add some white to it, and let's see what happens. It should be very rich. Oh, beautiful. Look at that nice color. It's very, very dark, but very rich. Wouldn't be half as pretty if it didn't have some red in it as well. Purple right out of the box is a little bit boring. So I've added a little red to the purple. And again, as you mix, don't be afraid if some of it comes out darker, some of it comes out lighter. That makes your picture more interesting. Now we've got the center of the flower done. Now let's mix more white in to that red and purple mixture. A lot more white. And we should get a very pale sort of pinkish lavender. Let's see. Ah, isn't that nice? And I'm going to use the front of my brush and the back of my brush and just push it around. And I can dip right in. If my brush gets dry, I don't go to the water. I'm going right to the white and making that white act like something that's sort of pushing the color around. If I want to get a very pale color, I add more white. If I want a deeper color, I add more purplish red. Okay, and by turning my brush back and forth, look at this. It really begins to look like an oil painting. If I lose my lines, no big deal. When it's dry, I'll come back again and I'll outline it. Let's go to the reddish purple and put a dark line in through. Ooh, that's rather dark. I can fix it if I need to. I don't know. Maybe it'll look good. What I think I'll do, since that line turned out too thick, and yours may too, I can do this. I can smear it a little bit and just make it a little more indistinct. See how easy it is to fix up things? Some people get all shaken and shook up if they have something that they consider a mistake. Just take your mistakes and turn them into positive points by taking your color and changing a little. Instead of giving up, you really need to persevere and hang in there and say, I can fix it, and take some paint and change a little bit. Now notice again, I use the back and the front of my brush, and my brush is loaded with paint, lots of white. Yours is going to look entirely different from mine, and that's good. All right, a little more white, a little more pink, a little more purple. Sometimes I mix right on the paper, and that's good. Even on an orchid or any other plant, not every single petal is exactly the same as the other. Notice that I went into that a little bit. That's all right. When this dries, you'll go back and outline. Now I've got a little deeper purple on my brush, going up through the center, out through the center like this, following the curve of the petal. Follow the curve or the direction in which it goes. And isn't that nice? Very pretty. You can shade a little bit here, a little bit darker right there if you want to. And by using white, red, and purple, you've got all those shades. Now by itself, that's a very pretty flower. If you want to stop right there, that's perfectly okay, because you'll have a beautiful flower. But if not, let's put some greenery in there for leaves. I go instinctively to the yellow and to the green Do a little blue maybe. And this is not an orchid leaf that I'm doing. It's just a leaf that might be in the rainforest. I don't want you to think that orchid leaves necessarily look like this. And if I want it darker, I add blue. If I want it lighter, I add white and yellow. And so that I get a variety of colors there and shades. And almost finished with this part. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to show you some of these that have been done with black in the background. The leaves show up very nicely with a background. Ooh, a little bit of orange got in there by what you might call a mistake, but I like it. It looks very good. Put some more green here. If I think that that's too light next to there, what can I add? I add blue to the green. Works out very nicely. And we have right here, by the way that we're working, we're making what we call a very painterly picture. A picture that doesn't look like somebody spent hours and hours thinking. They didn't do this on the computer. They did it by hand and with all the inspiration and creativity that that means. If you want to put sort of a darker line down the center of the leaves, you can add some blue and green. Looks very nice. And now that picture is essentially finished. However, what I'm going to do is show you another picture for just a moment that is different from that a little bit. It's only half finished. And the reason that I'm showing this to you is because there's some interesting things happening here too. Notice you're getting some shading. Notice how bright the green is. And if you want to, now you don't absolutely have to, but if you want to, you can come back in with some black and do a black background behind your flower, which will make your flower really stand out. So you have a choice. You could leave the paper white, or you could paint a lot of greenery behind it, making it look like the rainforest. Or if you want your flower really to stand out, you can add some black behind your flower and behind your leaves as well. Let me show you. Well, we've started some black behind the leaves here again. And this is only partially finished. I'll show you a finished one in a moment. All right. So there's another possibility for finishing up the picture. Now that's unfinished. So let me show you a student example that's finished. That's done in shades of blue. And you'll notice that the black lines, drawing lines, have come back in again. So I'm going to take this, which I hope is dry, and show you how to take your crayon or your black felt pen when this is totally dry, like the second day, and the day after you've done the picture, and go ahead and outline everything that you drew in the first place. It's not absolutely essential that you do this, but it sure helps your picture have definition and picks it right up, especially if it's gotten a little lost or you haven't used enough contrast. So you want to outline everything again that you drew. And just don't try it while it's wet. Black crayon is just fine to use if you don't have these black permanent markers. And you just need to remember to press hard on the crayon, so hard that the crayon might almost break, but that's okay. But this is how you finish up your picture. Some of you will have black behind it. Some of you will just leave there. All right. I feel like that's a finished picture in and of itself. There's your orchid of the rainforest, which is also an epiphyte.